It should work. All right, guys. So welcome. I'm going to be looking between the computer over here and everyone over here. And this is like a new kind of dynamic. How to split my attention between the lovely faces on the computer and the real life human beings, the non-robots who are here with us in person. So, this is experimental, but this is very exciting that we can begin to renew. These questions we have of, some people are on one side of the screen, some people are the other. Can we make a minion together? It almost has that kind of feeling. So we have a hard copy packet with us here today. And what we're going to be looking at is a topic that's interested me for a while. It's a little bit of what I call rabbinic navel gazing, which means that, it's like, you ever see like these conventions where, especially in modern Orthodoxy, like there's a million journals and forums about talking about the future of modern Orthodoxy. And, the one thing that us modern Orthodox people love the most is like talking about ourselves. So for rabbis, I'm doing that in general also. So imagine modern Orthodox rabbis, that's what we love talking about all the time is ourselves. So I finally succumbed to that Yetzer Hara. And I looked into a topic that interested me for quite a while, which is if you look in the Gemara, we have our Thursday night Gemara class. So we have a machlokes Rava and Abaye. We have a dispute between Rava and Abaye. Doesn't say Rabbi Rava, doesn't say Rabbi Abaye. It was very casual at times in the Gemara. Okay, you had Rav this and Rebbe that. But nowadays, you open up a sefer, and you open up the beginning of a book, and just like for any random guy who had like a small little shtetl in Europe, it says Hagon Hamaforsam Ha'iloi Ha this Ha that is and like the title just go on and on forever if you ever look at this. And so it kind of interested me about the whole question of all the honorifics that have been amassed over these past years. But then also, it was an interesting question. When I was at REIT studying in Smicha, people would have these debates all the time, like, oh, that guy, he passed the course, but he doesn't really deserve the title rabbi. And so this relates a little bit to our conversation that we had a while back about female rabbis. But really, we should take a step back and ask the question about, before asking if women can be rabbis, really it behooved us to ask, what qualifies someone to be a rabbi in general? And what makes someone maybe qualify for more than just a basic rabbinic title, but maybe that they would be deserving of this Hagon Hamaforsam Ha'iloi stuff. And then also what I hope to explore in this class, probably going to be a two-part series to be honest, is this problematic? Is this a positive development that we are coming up with all these titles nowadays? When I go on Facebook, how many people have Facebook here? Just curious. Toby, you have Facebook. Mm-hmm. Jake, Gloria, yes, you have Facebook. Okay, so you go on Facebook and you see sometimes people, once they get their smicha and they become a rabbi, on Facebook they write Rabbi Joe Greenblatt. I don't know. Is that a real rabbi? I just made it up. Sure. I hope it's not. So I'm sure there's a Joe Greenblatt out there somewhere. So, Rabbi so-and-so, but you don't see it in any other profession, right? You don't see on Facebook for someone's regular profile, Dr. so-and-so, professor.
Oh, I'll bet you do. I'm not on Facebook, but I'll bet you see that.
It's very less frequent, but you'll see among some of my Orthodox colleagues, and I find it a little bit more frequent with my non-Orthodox colleagues, that they like to put the rabbi title on. They could be on Clubhouse, on Facebook. LinkedIn, I'd understand. LinkedIn is a professional network, but you see that a lot. So that's kind of what got my interest, which is this whole title business in general. Where does it come from? What are the parameters? Is it healthy, or is it something that we should be reimagining and reevaluating? So that's what leads us to our shir tonight. It will likely be a two-part series because I know you don't have the hard copy in front of you, but we got quite a few pages to cover, 15 pages in total, and lots of fun material to go through. Okay, so let's.
You do see doctor a lot.
What was that?
You do see the honorific doctor.
Right. Oh, so Zay, what you reminded me of was a Wall Street Journal op-ed that came out a while ago, which maybe that's what you're thinking about. What kind of partially stimulated this journey for me is that there was a famous or infamous Wall Street Journal op-ed around January time after the Bidens came into office. So it was, something like Dr. Jill Biden dropped the title because she had a doctorate in education as opposed to a doctorate in a hard science. So
And she
you know,
insists on using it.
Well, no,
She insists
and
on
and I
using it.
I will tell you that I believe it is still AP policy to only use doctors for medical personnel.
right. So you know what? So
So,
imagine
I
like
mean,
our
I don't think they've changed it. They may have, but I don't think so.
right. So imagine, Susan, in our rabbinic world, imagine, you know, if you're a pulpit rabbi, you go by rabbi, but if you're like a Kiruv campus rabbi, then you don't get the title. You know, imagine we start making distinctions like that. Which, by the way, we're going to see a source from Rav Elchanan Wasserman. If you, you know what,
A lot of campus rabbis don't use, I mean, they don't have
Yeah.
their students call them rabbi.
Right.
They're not,
So, well, there, and part of it, I think, also is A, it's an informal culture, but B, you know,
right.
people are doing campus work tend to be young guys right out of smicha. So they're probably, you know, trying to be the cool, relatable people, you know, like, yeah, call me Rabbi Joe. I think there actually is a JLIC Rabbi Joe, so I should be careful. But that's how they go. Now, let's see if I could, you know what? We'll get to the source when we get to the source. Oh, it's source number 15. What was that? Yeah, you know, you see it in Israel a lot, actually. You see that in Israel, like, if I were in Israel, they would say Rav, you know, Rav Moshe. They wouldn't say Rabbi Kurtz or Rav Kurtz. They would say Rav Moshe. That's just like the norm. Even for big scholars who are, you know, well on in their years, that's just a cultural thing, which is interesting. But you see in the Gemara also, right? Rav Shmuel, you know, so something like that. Rav Yossi. So you will see that. Okay, but if you look at verse number 15, that's actually a point that is made by Rav Elchanan Wasserman. Rav Elchanan Wasserman says, he's quoting Titin Emes Yaakov. So we're on page 7, source 15. We're just jumping ahead for a second. Sorry, no, that's okay. Paragraph 1. B'sefer Or Elchanan mitoldoso shel Gon Rav Elchanan Wasserman zatzal. Mesuber she'amar mishmo shel Chavetz Chaim zatzal. The Rav Elchanan Wasserman quotes the Chavetz Chaim, who says, She'ein lechanos toar harav afilo ish talmid chacham imeno yoshev al kisei harabanos o mishamish behora o rosh hayeshiva. That if someone, basically, we shouldn't be doling out the title rabbi to anybody, unless, even if this person is a scholar, if he doesn't serve as a communal rabbi, if he's not a posek for the community, he doesn't decide halacha, or he's not a rosh yeshiva, a huge rabbinic figure by profession or by erudition, then over Amidvar Sheker Tircha, one is violating the prohibition of lying by calling them a rabbi. So that's a very fascinating opinion, which gets to the point that we're saying about, you know, if I know some Torah, does that make me a rabbi? So in the yeshivish world, it's a little different than the modern Orthodox world, or basically anything to the left of the yeshivish world. So in the modern Orthodox world, and especially when you go to non-Orthodox denominations, the title rabbi is seen more as a degree. I learned for a 4-year program. Instead of a doctorate or a master's, I come out with smicha. I come out with ordination. But in the yeshivish world, not a lot of people who work as rabbis actually have smicha. They don't actually have ordination. So I was unfortunately a very disrespectful high school student. So I had a Bakiyas, my grandfather laughs because he knows all too well. So back in the day, I had a Bakiya Shir Rebbe. So basically we had our main Rebbe earlier in the day. And then the Bakiya Shir Rebbe, he would basically come in for like 45 minutes. And, you know, like what we do Gemara Thursday nights, he would go through the Gemara, share some supplementary ideas. And, you know, he's like a young Kollel guy. So I asked him, you know, when he got his smicha, where he got his smicha, and he said he doesn't have smicha. So then me being the terrible, disrespectful student I was, I'm like, oh, so you're not Rabbi so-and-so, you're Mr. So-and-so. And I regret it to this day. But essentially.
But they've called like some of the teachers at bicultural by rabbi, even though they don't have smicha.
So right. So that's the thing. In the yeshivish world, well, bicultural, I guess I didn't know they were doing that also. But in the yeshivish world, so my mother works, Zadie, right? So your daughter, my mother, works in the Darche office.
And nobody calls him rabbi.
Yeah, anyone by virtue of being literally being a man working in an administrative office is called Rabbi Plony, Rabbi so-and-so. Because I guess if you're a rabbi, if you're a man and you work in a yeshiva environment, even if you're just dealing with tuition and financials the entire day, all of a sudden you get upgraded to rabbi. So the term rabbi gets thrown around a lot in the more yeshivish world, because the thing also is there's a lot of people who, frankly, they might know more than your average modern Orthodox pulpit rabbi, but they just never got a formal smicha. But they've been sitting in Beis Medrash and Kollel for 10 years straight and learning nonstop. So they have the knowledge base, but they just never did a formal program. So it's a more interesting phenomenon. Whereas in the YU world, right? I imagine when there was a search committee that was hiring me, they reached out to Y and like, okay, did he go through the smicha program? We want to see a guy went through a smicha program. So just different cultures. The idea of like smicha being this degree, professional degree to a certain degree, is a new idea to a certain extent. Okay, but now that's our introduction. We're going to delve into the source sheet right now. So let's go into source number 1. And source number 1, really, we're just trying to get, section 1 is, where do we see the origin? Like, let's say you're 10th grade Moshe Kurtz, and you want to be as disrespectful as possible, and pushing, trying to cost people English and parents and grandparents, right, Sadie? So the idea is, I would ask, give me a source. Where does it say that I have to call someone a rabbi if they're a rabbi? Well, we have the idea of respecting Talmidei Chachamim in the Gemara Kiddushin, source number 1. Tanu Rabbanan, mipnei seva takum. So it says that one should rise for someone who has seva. That literally means someone who's elderly, but actually it refers to someone who is scholarly. Many times age does bring on erudition. So yachol afilu mipnei zaken ashmai tamid lomar zaken. So I would think I would stand up for someone who is a wicked, wise person. Now we're going to explore this later on when we talk about different denominations and I get myself into trouble. But Talmud Lomar Zaken. But the Gemara says, since it says in the word Zaken, it teaches me the Ein Zaken Ella Chacham. A Zaken teaches me also that a person has to have Chachma. But that being said, this Gemara in Kiddushin, which I think pretty much every, this is one of my jokes also. So in the yeshivish world, they learn the same stuff that the modern Orthodox high schools do, but they learn them as summer masechtas. So, so Kiddushin, this area over here in Kiddushin, where it talks about kabbalis avicha vesimecha, respecting one's parents, respecting one's elders, respecting, Erwin, you want to say something?
Yeah, if you take a look at the translation.
Yeah.
Nowhere near what you said.
Yeah.
Because, hoary is grayish white. That's, old and trite. Yeah, I just looked it up.
I don't know. It's an interest. I think the translation is not the. That's why I have to like the original Hebrew. I don't know where to get the word hoary and come up with all these things from. But essentially, seva refers to someone who is of advanced age, and here it means in the context someone who has erudition as well. So okay, but the Shulchan Aruch codifying it says also l'talmid likros l'rabba b'shmo. Based on this, a person is not allowed to call their Rebbe by his name. Now, back in the day, we used to have what was called a Rebbe Mufak. A Rebbe Mufak was a person who you learned the majority of your Torah from. They were your Rebbe, not someone who you had as a Rebbe for 1 year in high school, but someone who's your Rebbe for life. That person's a Rebbe Mufak. So it's prohibited to call a Rebbe Mufak by his first name. Rather, you must give them a title. The Shulchan Aruch in source number 3 then says mitzvahs aseh lakum, that there's a mitzvah to stand up for such people. For anyone who's a scholar, even if they're not a zaken, that's the important point. Because it says in the pasuk, you would think if I read the pasuk alone, that only if it's someone who's learned and elderly as well. But comes along the Shulchan Aruch, it says no, it refers to even someone who is young, but who is learned as well.
Yeah, I might throw in at this point that in the yeshivish world, it is normal for even a married man to go to his Rebbe for advice on an important topic.
That's true. So what would be the import of that?
The importance of the relationship of a Jew with his Rebbe. That's emphasizing what you had said.
Oh,
Rebbe.
okay, I see. Right, the idea of the Rebbe Mufak. True, that's a good example. And Das Torah is a good topic for another class, because Das Torah is the idea, is almost like this papal infallibility idea, that you go to a rabbi and you ask them, should my son marry this person's daughter? Should I make this business investment? So it's it's almost a funny thing. I would say to a certain degree, the yeshivish rabbinate and the Honorifics rabbinate should swap Baal Bat. Now, I'm not talking about you guys, of course, when I say this, because you're all invested. They should swap Baal Bat to a certain degree, because in yeshivish world, you have rabbis who generally don't have a college education. They know Torah well, but they don't know much beyond the world of the Beis Medrash. But meanwhile, you have people coming to consult them on matters that have nothing to do with what's in the Gemara, nothing to do with what you'll find inside the Beis Medrash. Should I invest in this? Should I invest in Bitcoin? What's the rabbi know about cryptocurrency? But meanwhile, in the non-Orthodox world, we get lucky if the majority of our congregants are consulting us on halachic matters alone. So, really we should stop, because at least the non-Orthodox rabbi, we have college degrees, master's degrees. So if anything, if at least if they're gonna ask a question that's on Torah related, they may as well go to someone who has a secular education also. But that's just my quip.
In the prior generation, some of the Gilei did have college degrees.
That is true.
Lichtenstein, the Lubavitcher Rebbe.
Right, and the Rav and the Lubavitcher Rebbe were in University of Berlin together. But it's not as all, that was more of a Western European phenomenon, where I think Sri also had they had doctorates. But most of Eastern European Jewry, I guess maybe because the culture barred them, perhaps you can argue, they didn't have that kind of level of education. But we're talking about nowadays also. That's a phenomenon. Okay. Now the thing is, nowhere in here does it say that you must call a standard. You go to a shul down the street. Where does it say that you have to call that person by the title of rabbi? It just says you're Rebbe Mufak. It says that you have to stand up for any rabbi, which actually that's something I was raised when I was a little kid. That when a Rebbe from the school walks in the room, everyone stands up immediately. And I remember when I was in a classroom and not everyone stood up for a particular Rebbe, like he just walked in, no one knows, they didn't stand up. He got so upset and he said, how dare you, you should be standing up. And then this is the kicker. He said, I'm not asking you to stand up for my kavod. I'm asking you to do it, so you can learn how to have respect. Which I didn't buy it, by the way. I mean, it depends who's saying it. Like if it's a person.
Now would you?
I mean, like there are certain people I know who aren't rodef achar kavod, who aren't running after accolades all the time. And if someone like that said it, I would believe it. But there's like sometimes there are like people who are trying to always get the next accolade. So if someone like that says it, it's hard for me to believe that's coming from a genuine place. Like, it's not for me that you're giving me the kavod. I just genuinely want you to understand the halacha. It's like. Maybe I should work and be Malamed Schus more. I should get benefit of the doubt. I don't know. It's probably a concern in me. Yeah, see, I want to. Oh God, gobbling 1 month from now. All right. So, because this seems only limited to a Rebbe Mufak, we have to go to source number 4. This wonderful sefer that I found on Otzar Chachma, which is the biggest online database for finding Sfarim. And I just figure, let me type in the word Kavod Harav and see what Sfarim come up. And there's a lot of Sfarim literally just written on the topic of giving Kavod to a rabbi and giving honor to a rabbi. So, it's called Otzar HaChachma. So I only have access to it through YU. But we'll see. Hopefully they don't revoke my access to it at some point, because it's helped me make a lot of shiurim. So in Sefer Kavod V'Hiddur by Rav Yitzchak Eliyahu Adler, I'm not exactly sure who that is, but he apparently is very learned. So he writes that nowadays, let's see if we can find his source number 4. Mashmos HaPoskim she'isur likros rabo b'shmo, the prohibition of calling a rabbi by their first name. Nemer barabo mufak davka. It sounds like from the Shulchan Aruch we saw that only refers to someone's Rebbe Mufak. What's the issue? I don't know if it's an issue. Maybe we're happy. Most of us don't have Rebbe Mufaks anymore. Most of us have, a pulpit rabbi at your shul. But as much as I love the fact that we get to learn together more than once on a weekly basis, many of us, chances are you're not learning the majority of your Torah from me or Rabbi Cohen. I'd imagine maybe yes, if I mean in your whole life. I mean, maybe if that is the case, then it would be a rare instance, but that's not usually how it works. V'dasat Sasha b'shmo levad below to seves Torah Rebbe also Abra Roshina Mufak v'gam ben Ishchai kas shenochu shemas kishmo yomer Rebbe Ploni. Okay, but mikol makom, second to last line. B'yameinu efshar shegam hamakilim yodu shenir hadover kizilzul kishemaskir shmo below shem Torah. So he says maybe nowadays calling someone by the title of rabbi is really no different than, ironically, than standing up. Standing up was a rising for a Talmid Chacham when they entered the room. That was something that was expected for anybody, no matter who they were. They got their smicha, they're established as a relatively learned person. You stand up for them when they come in the room. So nowadays, for whatever reason, we're not as makbid about that in some circles, but what's become the standard nowadays, though, is to call every person who is a rabbi, Rabbi so-and-so. So this Sefer Kavod V'Hitter makes the assertion that that applies to anyone nowadays. The issue that we have to explore, which brings us to section number 2, is, okay, great. I know that if somebody is a scholar, they're a learned person, they know a lot of Torah, they teach Torah, then I call them by the title of rabbi. The question is, what is the threshold for someone be considered erudite enough, being learned enough, that they deserve to get the title of rabbi? Again, does it have to do with institutional connection, or could it be, again, it could be someone who's in the community, who's a very learned person. I mean, many times I try to, let's say, call Rabbi Jeff Kahn, Rabbi Kahn, because he's a very learned person. He doesn't work as a rabbi, but he's here in our community. He teaches a Daf Yomi shir. So, it might be something for us to consider, that people in our community who might not work as rabbis, but are learned people who are teaching Torah, that might be something to consider. So let's take a look at our sources here. And there is a huge divergence among the commentaries as to how tolerant they are of calling other people who they consider their inferiors rabbis. Because you can imagine, right? If I think of myself as this much of a Talmid Chacham, I'm going to think very lowly about the guy who only knows this much, right? So I'm naturally going to probably draw the line around somewhere where I feel comfortable. Doesn't that make sense? So let's take a look. Look in the Shach in source number 5 on page number 2. The Shach says that what's the qualification for being called the Rav? He quotes based on Tosfos in Kiddushin, you need to be someone who is exceptionally learned, exceptionally wise. Look in the next bolded line at the end. What's that mean to be? Well, what's that mean to be exceptionally wise? I'll translate literally, and you'll tell me what you think that means. That he is more wise, more learned than the rest of the masses. Now, that still doesn't give us an exact criterion. That doesn't give us a precise measurement on the barometer, but it clearly is saying that not just, I remember one time I was talking to a guy, he taught at this, he was asked to teach a Gemara class at a program called Drisha. So Drisha is, are you taking that, sir, Toby? Susan, you said something?
I think we're familiar with it.
Familiar with him. Marissa did a winter program with him twice. So he was asked to teach beginners, he taught a beginner's Gemara to some people who were there. And he remarked to me in passing, he said something to the extent of, he had his art scroll Gemara with him. And he said, yeah, I just have to be like a page ahead of, I don't know that much. I just have to be a page ahead of the guys who were in the class with me. And then all of a sudden I'm the Rebbe. So I'm sure, that's not the average teacher they have at their program, but that was that one particular person who was teaching there. He admitted he didn't know that much, but he knew how to read an art scroll and to then give over what he read in the art scroll. And he could look up the art scroll, a day before he had to teach that piece in the art scroll. So then that was the person who was more learned. I don't think the Shach is referring to a scenario like that. It's unclear to me. This is many years ago, and I wasn't actually at that class. I was talking to him at another context before that class. So what what I think the Shach is referring to isn't someone who, knows just enough that he's then able to teach a shir to other people, but it means clearly someone who, I might not know that much Torah, but it's very clear to me that this person is a learned person. Now, that's the funny thing. Determining who is learned, by the way, requires a certain level of knowledge yourself.
Exactly.
Because if I have no way to determine who is considered I have no way to determine who should be like the medical professionals calling shots for our country, for our communities, because I just don't have the base requisite amount of knowledge of medicine to even make a call and determine, who should, who's who in the field. And same thing in regular law. So, many times, and we're going to talk about this later on, Rav Hankin, part of what got me into this was there's a chub from Rav Hankin where he says that there are people who they know enough Torah to teach it over nicely, and then people think of them as the next Gadol Hador. But meanwhile, because their audience might not know so much Torah, and this person just happens to be very charismatic and happens to be able to give over things in a very eloquent manner, the people who just don't have a base level knowledge of Torah don't know how to distinguish that guy who's a good orator from someone like Rav Mordechai Willig or Eliashiv. So that actually is a challenge sometimes in the modern Orthodox community too. Sometimes people, obviously I know Toby, we have our pizza or Schechter, we won't get into that. But be it as it may, I have to have some requisite amount of learning to determine, just to have an idea of who's considered a gadol and who's not. So that's another important point.
I might want to insert at this point that somebody can have all kinds of smikas and all kinds of knowledge of Torah law, but if he lacks judgment, if he's got personality flaws, he doesn't have wisdom.
Very good. So Zadie, I think what you refer to, we're going to look at, God willing, later on. So remember, we talked about source one. There's a Zakin Ashmai, which there's different ways to translate it, but the base translation is a wicked elder. I wonder how they translate it here. Do they translate it here? Okay, but I'm translating it as someone who's like a sinner. An age. Okay, so if you have like you said, so point out, if you have someone who they're very learned, but they clearly are not keeping mitzvah adam lechavero, then their learning isn't going to do much for them in terms of making them into a good religious figure. That's an excellent point, Zadie. Okay, but the Shach is generally quoted as having the more constrictive understanding. He says it has to be very clear to everyone that this person just like leagues beyond the rest of the crowd, leagues beyond the other Kollel people, the other rabbis, and that's like what makes someone a real rabbi. That's how most people understand the Shach. However, if you look in L'Reacha Kamocha, he quotes a few things for us. He quotes Pele Yoetz and he quotes Rav Eliashiv at the end, source number 6 on the bottom. Like Rav Eliashiv, what's the criterion for someone deserving the title rabbi? You see only at the end in the quotes. What's it say? Yodea Lilmod. He knows how to learn. He knows how to learn. What does that mean? He knows how to learn. Again, it's a little bit vague. What's it mean? I think you see the difference is if I say, yeah, that person knows how to learn. And Rav Eliashiv says about you, that person knows how to learn. It has a much different connotation. There's a difference. He knows how to learn. Okay, he knows how to open up a Mishnah Berurah and read a basic Mishnah Berurah. Versus, when like a Talmud Chacham like Rav Eliashiv, Gadol Hador says that person knows how to learn, that means he's really giving a huge hashgacha on this person. So again, a little bit of ambiguity. But the Chavetz Chaim says that there will be many times people in communities who will justify critiquing a community rabbi on the basis of thinking that they don't deserve the title. So look at source number 7 in the Chavetz Chaim, and I'll translate, but you have the translation with you as well. The Chavetz Chaim, of course, being Hilchos Lashon Hara, he's worried about people slandering others. And in this little section here, he talks about slander that rabbis get as well. So he says at the beginning, V'da, is there Sipur Lashon Hara Fila Ama Aretz, even if someone is ignorant of halacha, Ki Gam Hu Bichlal Am Hashem V'tzivosah, because anyone who is a member of the nation of God, it is improper for you to speak Lashon Hara about them. So skipping a little bit, actually no, we'll just translate. And certainly if this person is someone who's learned in Torah. certainly the sin of Lashon Hara becomes much more compounded at that point. V'amar Chazal, Kol Masaber Achim Mitazo Shel Talmid Chacham Novo B'Gehenna. You start talking about the private matters of a Talmid Chacham, you will fall into the depths of hell. Shnemar, the Kampam Nichnas Ayidei Sebechal Mevazat Talmid Chacham. You do a good Anshush Mevazat Talmid Chacham, and he quotes in Yordea that how great the Isser is of not criticizing, but slandering a Talmid Chacham. Now skipping past the parentheses, but the evil inclination will sometimes get a person. What's he going to get you to say? That so back in the day, you know, I might say to myself that, look, the rabbis in the times of the Gemara, that was the real McCoy, Rava, you have Bayer, Achista, or you have all the great Gedolei Adorvan in the times of the Talmud. Nowadays, look, you're stuck with people like Moshe Kurtz. So what you might say to yourself is, you know, back then, they were great Talmidei Chachamim. But look at the people we're stuck with nowadays in this generation. But thankfully for people in my line of work, he says this is a great mistake. Because someone who's considered learned is based on the generation. Even nowadays, in our times, that is interesting. If he is able, he should, if he ought to be giving piskei halacha, ought to be deciding halacha, v'yagea batorah. What's the yagea batorah? We're going to see where Sternbach's going to talk about it. It's our good old friend of Sternbach. Yagea batorah means that you are, they say back in Darche, I have to get a good translation for it. You have to, you know, harving in Torah is what they would say. You have to be toiling in Torah. Toiling is probably the best translation for that. Then Nikra Talmid Chacham. Then you're called a Talmid Chacham. From a vaso, so I feel with Dvar Ma'alma, and if you degrade someone like that, you malign them, even with, you know, simple slander, Lashon Hara, even not in their face, Avon Plilihu, it's a great, terrible sin, the Chayiv Nidos, and you can even be liable to excommunication on that basis. Wow, that is a rough one over there. Makes me wonder if the Chavetz Chaim was dealing with a lot of politics in his community at the time, right? But that's like a huge statement over there. Now, I will comment very quickly for those of you who, you know, maybe over the years, if we have, I'm still not justifying. Again, even if someone's not a Talmid Chacham, by the way, this Isser Lashon Hara applies. So I want to clarify. The Chavetz Chaim is just saying, on top of that, if he's a Talmid Chacham, then there's an extra level of sin that's being done here. But certainly, we're not supposed to be slandering even, you know, someone who's not a Talmid Chacham. But so interesting, what we're going to get to in a moment, soon, is what's that mean, Roy Lahoros V'Yagei Torah? Again, what I do for the most part is not, I wouldn't call Psak Halacha. What I do for the most part is what's called being Mar Mako. For instance, you ask, oh, I forgot Yel V'Yavo on Rosh Chodesh night. What do I do? So when I tell you, you don't have to repeat Yel V'Yavo when you forgot it, Meyer Rosh Chodesh night coming up next week. So I didn't paskin for you that you don't have to repeat Shmona Esrei. What I did was I may have not pulled the Shulchan Aruch off the shelf and literally showed you the Sifin Shulchan Aruch, but essentially what I was doing is I'm referencing something that's already on the books. Psak Halacha is, let's say electricity was just invented now, and then Moshe Kurtz comes along and decides, I'm a Bar Hachi. I can actually, I can make a decision. I could argue whether electricity is fire, whether it's building on Shabbos. That is above my pay grade. In fact, actually, in Smicha, in REITs, that's actually what they emphasize a lot in professional classes. They say, for the most part, we're not giving you Smicha to innovate new halachos. We're giving you Smicha to educate you so that you could point to halachos on the books and make decisions by extrapolating that. So that's, and that relates back to our discussion about Yoetzot Halacha. That's what a Yoetzot Halacha does also for the most part. A Yoetzot Halacha, she's not making new halachos. She's essentially also pointing to her knowledge of Shulchan Aruch of Poskim and saying, by the way, I remember in Nishman I learned that this was the halacha back in yeshiva. So the thing is that many rabbis also are doing the same thing. For the most part, what we are doing is not innovating halacha, but we're just pointing out to people what the halachos are in the Shulchan Aruch, because hopefully we've read through some Shulchan Aruch at some point in our life. Okay, so that's an important point that we'll get to soon. But if you look in source number 8, in Dirshu, it quotes, so the Dirshu came out with their own special Mishnah Berurah. The Dirshu Mishnah Berurahs are amazing resource, because the issue with the Mishnah Berurah, look, the Mishnah Berurah doesn't need my haskama. The Mishnah Berurah is fantastic. It's wonderful. Groundbreaking commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. But it was written by the Chafetz Chaim. And there's been many shuvos that have addressed new phenomenon that came after the Chafetz Chaim. So even if you're someone who's of the opinion that the Mishnah Berurah is the final word on halacha, there's still many things that have come up after the Mishnah Berurah himself. So what they did is footnotes on the Mishnah Berurah, and they'll say, Rav Wasser says this, and Rav Moshe Feinstein says that, Rav Eliashiv says that. So in the Dirshu footnotes, they quote Rav Chaim Kanievsky, Shechol Shem Muchsak LeTalmid Chacham Harish Bez Mishum Bizaya. So again, who's a Talmid Chacham? Is someone who's Muchsak Talmid Chacham. What's Muchsak? They're established. They're understood to be a Talmid Chacham. The issue is, if someone's established as a Talmid Chacham, well, it's kind of circular, because, well, why did we establish him to begin with? And we're actually going to talk about instances where people have fooled their communities into thinking that they're a Talmid Chacham. For instance, there's a good story. My father always likes to tell me this one. Sadie, you've probably heard this at the table in the past. My father always likes to tell this apocryphal story about a yeshiva boy that he, probably like myself, made a lot of mischief back in school. And so finally, after all the meeting with the parents and deliberating back and forth, they finally decided we have to expel this student from the school. And so it was a very from school. So they wrote the letter of expulsion. They wrote it in Hebrew, like they do for their documents. So this guy, he leaves New York. He takes a flight out into the middle of Yehupitzville, in the middle of America. There's a little bit of a community over there that needed a rabbi. So they say, okay, we need to do our due diligence. They couldn't, I don't know, they maybe have phones back then, I'm not sure. So they just said, can we see your certificate of smicha? So he takes out his letter of expulsion that's written in Hebrew, and he shows it to the people in the community, and he says, oh, here's my document of smicha. They not knowing any better, like, okay, some nice Hebrew words on here, good handwriting. Okay, it looks like an official Hebrew document, and signatures on there of the Rabbanim on there. Wow. So they hire him as the rabbi. So, okay, most people don't get their way in that way, but it is an interesting question about how people make it into it. And this leads us to the section that we will conclude with tonight. We're going to spend the last 10 minutes on a section talking about the pitfalls and challenges of determining who makes the cut. Because, okay, we have again, it's still a little bit vague. I understand that. But we have like a general idea based on the sources we saw, who is deserving of a title, who's deserving of the honor, the respect, and all that fun stuff that comes along with being considered a Talmid Chacham. But remember how we talked about at the beginning that nowadays people want all these titles, Hagon, Harav, Eloi, Hamaforsam. I can't even think of these things. These aren't things that like roll off my tongue, But again, next time I'll come in with a sefer. You open up certain books, you see like all these abbreviations. And you see all these abbreviations, and it's just like a title upon a title upon a title. And the issue is that back in the day, and arguably today, certain people, if they don't get the full list of honorifics and accolades, they're going to say, what kind of disrespect is this? An affront to my honor. And Rav Akiva Eiger, actually, so we're on page number 4 over here. Rav Akiva Eiger, at the beginning of his tshuva, so there was at the beginning of his responsa, which I think his children compiled and had published, the children have a letter where they're talking about the kind of the final wishes Rav Akiva Eiger had when things were being published and how to refer to a rabbi in the sefer. And so Rav Akiva Eiger says that I either call someone, it's actually at the end of the second column, he says, I either call somebody by Harav or by Hagon. I don't start this whole business of Harav Hagon, Hagon Harav, Hagon to someone who's great. I don't start adding on. I only go with one title. I don't overdo it. Why? he mentions that there are 3 possible pitfalls that can happen. And by the way, Rabbinic here only mentions 3 pitfalls. We're going to see this more than 3 pitfalls with this whole new industry of the proliferation of titles and all these honorifics that are being given out to rabbis. So he writes as follows. He writes, so we're looking in the first column, second paragraph. He says that, first of all, shenis abak shecha. The second matter that I request of you, my children, so he says, don't print the beginning. We've actually seen this because this Monday night class, sometimes instead of a source sheet, we'll actually look at a primary text alone and we'll go through a tshuva. So sometimes when we learn Rav Asher Weiss, sometimes the shaila, the question, is included in the sefer. But many times you look at Igros Moshe, you look at Rav Moshe Feinstein, and most shuvos, they don't have the original question. They don't have the original text of the person asking the question. Now, why is that we don't have the original context? Many times the tshuva will say, I was asked about a particular matter. So many times because there are private details in there. But Rav Akiva Eger says, because people were calling me by all these titles, and they're really piling it on and really trying to flatter me. So he says, if I had the power, I would do away with this whole industry of titles that people are giving out. Now, does anyone remember pop quiz when we saw a phrase like this previously in our shir? When's the last time we saw some rabbi say, there's this terrible thing happening, and there's only I had the power, I would make this change? Does anyone remember? It's a long time ago. I don't expect anyone to, but just in case. When we were learning about Tirchut and Tzibura, that may have been a Wednesday night topic. Maybe that's why we don't remember. It was a Wednesday night topic when I was covering a Wednesday night shir, which Baruch Hashem, by the way, we now have the 10:30 shir. Well, now it's 10:15 Shabbos mornings after 8 o'clock minyan after the Kiddush. So no longer Wednesday night class. Now it's the Shabbos morning class once again, back in its proper place. So when I was covering back in the day, we went through a few classes about Tirchut and Tzibura. And we read a tshuva from Rav Yaakov Emden, where Rav Yaakov Emden was talking about all the Misha Beirachs that were added on Shabbos. So, nowadays we don't even do a Misha Beirach after. By the way, I might be getting myself in trouble over here. A lot of people, when we shortened davening, we abridged davening during the beginning of the pandemic after we came back to shul. So, for instance, we didn't start with brachos in the morning.
Right.
Now, people came over to me, 1 or 2 people said, when are we getting brachos? I think, Erwin, you may have been one of them. When are we getting brachos? Right? Yeah, you're one of them. We were saying, when are we going to get brachos started again? One thing, and there are a lot of things that I just got comfortable with. And Baruch Hashem, we have congregants who are, on their game more so than I am, and they remind me about things that we're supposed to have. There's one thing that no one's reminded me about yet, which is the Misha Beirach after somebody gets an aliyah. No one's complained about that. And certainly no one's complained about the Misha Beirach on top of the Misha Beirach.
Time consuming?
Because you make a donation.
Right.
But that's for a second one. But usually there's 2 Misha Beirachs, right? There's a standard Misha Beirach, a generic one that everyone gets, and then there's a second one. You say, can you make a Misha Beirach? And then you say, for my father, for my aunt, for my dog, for my rabbi's dog, Yeah.
That's right, because in Abistan, in Fairfield, his wife doesn't nurse anymore. That was every Shabbos, every person who got called up came up with their list and whatever, but they had shorter. If there wasn't money coming in, you weren't getting your request.
Oh wow! So no one's requested to bring that Misha Beirach back yet. Wants to make a donation? Okay, so I guess I didn't realize that was it. Now I understand why. So okay, I guess people just really didn't care for the Misha Beirach. Rav Yaakov Emden, though, he wasn't opposed to. Now Rav Yaakov Emden, he was the rabbi. Now, if anything, part of the rabbi's portfolio sometimes is the fundraising. So you would imagine Rav Yaakov Emden would want to bring back the Misha Beirachs, so that way it would help bring some cash flow into the shul. But Rav Yaakov Emden, though, he was willing to forego even, I don't know if they did the donations to Misha Beirachs back then. Maybe that's a newer invention. But you're asking Erwin if back in Europe. Oh, okay, so okay. Oh, that's what they did. Okay. But Rav Yaakov Emden said, ideologically, he was opposed to having Misha Beirachs on Shabbos, for a number of reasons. One, just simply, we're not supposed to make bakashos on Shabbos. We're not supposed to make requests on Shabbos from God. That's why most of Shemona Esrei, which is making requests from God, we don't have that on Shabbos. It's one of the reasons. But also because since Misha Beirachs take up extra time during davening, and they're not obligatory, it's just going to schlep davening past the 2 hour. I didn't say 2 hour mark. I'm saying 2 hour mark because my shita has always been that davening should on Shabbos morning should never exceed 2 hours. So far, I've been successful in that. Let's see if we can keep that going. But anyway, why did I bring it up? Because at the end of his shuva, he said, I wish I could make these changes in my shul, but apparently there are people who are not letting me do that. So he said, something like that. If I had the power, I would annihilate all the Misha Barracks and get rid of all of them from davening. That's what he said. I don't know if you caught on to this, or Yaakov was a bit of a firebrand. My Rebbe, Rabbi J.J. Schachter, Shlita, he actually wrote his dissertation on Rav Yaakov Emden. Rav Yaakov Emden actually also. Oh, it's Rav Yonos and Eibshitz. Right, because Rav Yaakov Emden is most famous for the controversy. Usually that's the thing that we remember everyone for their controversies. It's like Rabbi Avi Weiss, we're just going to remember because female rabbis, but no one's going to remember all the Russian activism, that kind of stuff either. So, oh, that was controversial. That's a good point. Okay, fine. Okay, I guess he did. Okay, bad example. Never mind. Moving on. Oh yeah. Okay, good point. No, bad example. But Rabbi Jesher actually wrote his doctoral dissertation on Rav Yaakov Emden. So, but he had this Rav Yaakov Emden's famous sort of machlokis with Rav Yonos and Eibshitz. For Rav Yonos and Eibshitz, he would write a kameah, which is an amulet, and it was a form of Kabbalah to try to heal people by writing special incantations or a name of God in an amulet in order to heal people supernaturally. The issue is, this is coming off the heels relatively of the Shabtai Tzvi issue of a false messiah. So what happened was this moment there that he was starting to use amulets and use Kabbalah. Well, Kabbalah was what led everyone to his false messianism. So it created a whole controversy, and Rav Yaakov Emden, as you well point out, he was known as a bit of a firebrand because that was his cause celebre that he took up. So that was a very important point by Rav Yaakov Emden. But we see over here that the same language that Rav Yaakov Emden was used over here in Rav Akiva Eiger. Again, it's a very popular phrase. If I had the power, I would get rid of it. Now, before we run out of time, because Mincha is at 8:10, what are, let me ask you very quickly. What are the potential issues of the proliferation of honorifics? What do you think halakhically? Like, give me a halakhic terminology. What are the possible issues from a halachic standpoint of doling out superfluous honorifics to individuals?
Kind of waters down authority.
Okay, so Susan, you're saying is that if everyone, it's like I'm the only person in this generation here. So okay, there is a movie called The Incredibles that came out, and in the Incredibles, the Syndrome, who is the antagonist. Basically, it's all about superheroes, and then the superhero, and then so this guy who's the antagonist, he basically tries to make everybody have some sort of like powers or whatnot. And he says, I'm botching the line, but he says, when everybody's super, nobody's super. So that was his, that was the tagline that he had. And that's the idea here, that if everyone gets to be called Hagon, Harav, and before some Eloi, this and that, it's Chusa Yagan Alinu, Lolam Vad, so then nobody's super anymore. And if everyone gets called by these super honorific and long titles, then it begins to mean nothing. So that's an important point, Susan. This, so we're going to quickly go through the three issues. Issue number one, he says, is that there's avak chanufa, that there is a form of flattery that's being done here. You see, because when people are writing these letters to Rav Akiva Eiger, what happened is that they were trying to flatter Rav Akiva Eiger. They're trying to get a psak that was in their favor. So they would add on all these honorifics and titles and try to lay it on thick in order to win over Rav Akiva Eiger's favor. Maybe it was, who knows, maybe they were in a din Torah. They got into a disputation with somebody. So they would say, you say actually in court, right? You say, Your Honor, right? But imagine it's like every time you spoke to the judge, you said, Your Honor, if it would please, imagine like you start talking in third person. You do that so actually, so there's a case in Gemara in Masechus Avodah Zarah where was it Rechanav and Tradi? I'm forgetting which one it was, but basically he said that he said, kind of like your honor, but he was referring to Hashem. He wasn't referring to the judge. But because the judge interpreted that he was referring to him, he ruled in his favor. He's like, no, I was referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but I guess he was satisfied with that. So issue number one is flattery. You're trying to flatter the person by giving them all these additional titles. That's the issue lehakose for the writer. Ulamisha kosvin, and then for the people who are being written to, there are two potential issues that can come out halachically. Number one, avak geos, arrogance. If you are the recipient of all these different titles and all these different things that people are doling out to you, it could lead to gava, which is problematic. And then Rabbi Akiva Eiger says, and then oavak sinas chinam im yamatu. This is the important one I want to get to. It could lead to sinas chinam, right? Remember, every Tisha B'Av, somehow everyone comes out thinking that the only Isser that everyone committed for the base of Nation Yisrael was sinas chinam. We talked about the Ran, right? We mentioned this a few times. Ran talking about Birchas Torah, and people were machshav Torah enough. People didn't consider learning Torah to be the study of Torah to be more important than other studies. There's other issues, but right, we all remember from Tisha B'Av, sinas chinam, basis hatred is a bad thing. Well, imagine if you don't dole out enough titles, right? Imagine I just get so comfy with all the respect and honor and accolades that someone's giving me. If I don't get that from the next guy, if he just says, Rabbi so-and-so, then I'm going, what happened to Hagon Harav? Well, what happened to Ha'iloi? What happened to all these titles? So by raising the bar so much, it's kind of like mutually assured destruction at a certain point. What are you going to say, Erwin?
No, you're belittling you guys. You leave something out.
Right. So exactly. And so it's an unfortunate reality. Rabbi Akiva Eiger is realizing that, you would hope that people in this kind of position who rank Psak Halacha, that they wouldn't have these issues, but by virtue of anyone being in a position of power, people in my line of work, we naturally are very much predisposed to issues of gaiva and issues of thinking that everything's an affront to our honor. So Rabbi Akiva Eiger said, because of that, I don't even want that to be published in the Sefer. I don't want any titles that people refer to me to be published in the Sefer. I don't want any of these issues. I don't want to have a risk of being a bal gaiva. I don't want to have issues of sinas chinam. And because of that, those are three issues that Rabbi Akiva Eiger lists off the bat with the proliferation of titles. God willing, we'll pick it up with the Steichem, and next time we'll conclude over here. So Yasher Koach to our people who are with us in person on Zoom, and B'ez Hashem will do part 2 next week. Have to run to Mincha. All right.
Thank you
Good night,
very
everyone.
much, Rabbi. Thank you.
Yasher
Thank
Koach.
you.